This is usually not the type of talk I do. I usually talk about standards and ways of doing things um, and frameworks. But today I'm just going to talk about the importance of AI tooling in development purposes. And my views are my own, not my company's. I'm going to talk about some products, but they're not necessarily the products I'm endorsing or I'm saying, hey, you should go and buy. But I just want to talk about things that have worked for us and just to make awareness. I worked at the WEX as a VP of engineering, and I manage a large organization of 300 people, and been here for about a year and a half. Before this, I was at Amazon, and I joined Amazon in 2020 to work on AWS API Gateway Data Plane org, and that's where I learned how much the traffic can be handled by just regular commodity servers, and about 1.5 million requests per second were happening on the data plane APIs layer, and then obviously hundreds of thousands of the AWS service were actually using the gateway. I worked at I worked at Microsoft majority of the time in the past 21 or so years, where I started as a software engineer, and then I moved into the management roles, and then I worked at EA, Visa, and Amazon. So now today we're going to take a look at some of the why elements of why it's important to talk about this all the time until we actually incorporate the learnings of using AI tooling in our systems regularly. I will share with you some data captured by the consulting company called PricewaterhouseCoopers and Harvard Business Research. And then we're going to take a look at such a primer of API development stages and the things that we have to take a look at every time we develop any new API products, right? And then what challenges we run into. And then once we run into the challenges, how can we tackle some of those challenges using the API tooling, AI tooling that we have in front of us today. And then we'll summarize with my opinionated view. Now, in this picture here, you must have seen this before. The second two people are actually senior developers. And senior developers are the ones that generally say, hey, look, I don't deal with this vibe coding thing, right? Because once the code is generated, then I have to sit there and clean it up. It's going to take a lot of my time. Right? Bill Gates recently in June, I think, floated an idea, a question rather. He said, hey, what does vibe stand for in vibe coding? And Linus Torvalds, who created Linux, said that, hey, it is very inefficient but entertaining coding. Yeah, so it's vibe. And to a large extent, that's true, and we will take a look at how to address that problem. But the seriousness in this message is that we have to adopt AI tooling, whether we are senior engineers or junior engineers or whatever type of engineers, because as engineering leaders, my own perspective is that I want to get stuff done faster. I want to get in front of the customers much faster. Otherwise, there is an opportunity cost to pay. Right? And Y Combinator YC is one of the startup accelerators in San Francisco, a city I used to live in for many years. And Jerry Tan is the CEO. He said that out of all the submissions they have gotten, and this is, I think, from April or March of this year, he said from all the submissions they have gotten, about quarter of the companies had 95% of their code written using AI tools. And that sounds unbelievable. But these companies are also trying to create some AI native capabilities anyways to begin with. But you can see that they're just trying to prove a point that you don't need 50 people, 100 people, a large army of folks to develop a new idea. You can only have half a dozen people come up with the next billion-dollar business. Right? So this is the key point here, that using these tools, you can get in front of the customer much faster, much quicker, and with much lesser money. Now, a lot of numbers here in this slide, but just focus on the first row here, right? And that talks about 4.5 times the productivity that a developer or a person gives a company after they have been exposed to AI tooling. And this is in the industry where AI tooling can actually make a lot of difference, right? And then also you will see that there are 27% lesser jobs in this industry. So if I look at my own industry, software engineering, lesser jobs have been opened over the past 3-4 years. And then the third point talks about the skills inside the job descriptions that are looking for AI tools or AI skills has gone up by a quarter, right? And this is until 2023, late 23. And this study was published, I think, earlier part of last year. And also you can see that the number of jobs that require AI skill set has gone threefold, right, up. And then obviously it's important to know that when you're doing an AI-focused job, when you have AI skills to be able to create your your own small language model, large language model, modify that, create new GPT, and then set up your own MCP servers, you should get paid a little bit more, and 25% more salary was given to those folks. Now, fast forward to this year, you'll see that now you have about three. Now maybe we have normalizes like from year over year, from last year to this year, 3 times more revenue per worker. So now that means clearly that you have to have lesser people, or you can have the same number of people, but you can deliver more stuff, right, with those number of people you have. Lesser jobs, obviously, but the third number is very staggering. Now we have 66% change in the job descriptions that require AI skills. So that means they're becoming more and more table stakes now. And 7.5% year-over-year growth on the jobs that require AI skills. It doesn't sound a very big number, but there is an importance here. In this industry, which is prone to automation and AI tooling, the jobs have actually gone down about 11.5% year-over-year. In that period, the AI-driven jobs have gone up 7.5%. So that means it is the right thing for us to do. And lastly, 56% more money if you have AI skills. Now, just quickly also take a look at this chart here. And ChatGPT was launched in this black dot here. And anyways, the job trend was going down. But the jobs that are more impacted by AI tools or AI skills in general has actually gone much, much further down. And if you look at the right-hand side, the automation-prone jobs, the jobs that can be actually maybe reduced by using AI. Now, people are searching for jobs in these fields on Google. So you can see how many they have in the left section, and on the right side, things that are manual jobs, things anyways that have to be done, haven't actually increased that much, right? Now, so stages in API development. Coming back to our main topic, we have designer specification. You have to come up with the design. Here's my spec. Here is my requirement. You have to implement that, and you have to then test it, monitor it, and also you have to make sure that it is secure, it is not having any vulnerabilities. You have to continuously check for vulnerabilities. And also you have to have a first-class developer experience, because your APIs will be used by developers. Developers are opinionated, and I've talked enough about this in previous sessions. And they want to have a very clear-cut, simple interface, and they want to be able to sign up themselves and be able to play with the developer portal, and then make a decision whether to use your APIs or not. But that has some challenges, right? So that means you can have some spec that a very sharp developer wrote, and then you have an implementation of that API, and then thirdly, you have a developer portal that shows all the documentation that was generated using the spec. But if there is a slide, if there is any gap between these things, that means you now have a very tedious task at your hand. A lot of times you have to write a lot of code, but a lot of the code is very repetitive, like writing a lot of unit tests, for example, or writing base boilerplate code or muters, accessors, very basic stuff that you have to do many, many times. And could we actually accelerate that, right, using some tools? And there have been a lot of tools even before AI tooling came into picture, but we'll see the difference in a second. If you're writing a lot of code, new code, that means you have to write new test cases. If the code coverage is less, that means you have to go maintain that and write new test cases all the time to make sure that you stay above 90% code coverage, whether it is for unit tests or integration tests for the functionality. And also, you have to pay another company to do penetration testing and keep that up to date and fix those issues as well, vulnerabilities that you find. And again, the cost of building a first-class developer experience is also high, because you have to make sure that developers really get satisfied with that. And also, when you're building the developer experience, you also are maintaining a sandbox environment in the back. And the sandbox environment is where a developer can actually invoke the API calls, right? And of course, some nefarious people will try to bombard it, do a DDoS stack on it. Of course, you have mechanisms to handle that by the API gateway or WAF or other layers, but that is still tedious work somebody has to do. Now, how do we address the design phase? Now, when you're developing APIs, you can either be a very meticulous developer who can write down open API spec and say, hey, here are my contracts, here are the things it does, some documentation also in that. Or you can write down, given your Jira tickets or stories or a document that hints about the use cases that have to be developed with this API. And then you can have an open API spec generated for you. You can also write some notes as a developer. Here are the things I want in my API. Hence, spit me out a OpenAI spec, and that GPT-5 can do that, or other tools that are embedded within the coding editor also can do that. Cloud Sonnet has shown good promise in my at least testing, that gives very precise and not bloated output when you're asking it to do something. And then, when you're generating this code for a developer who has to implement a large project, I'm thinking about a technical lead or senior developer, there is sometimes the writer's block. Where do I get started? I have to do all of those things. I have to look at the logging. I have to look at the performance. I've looked at so many things, and so many different contexts have to be developed. But this is where these tools like Copilot or Amazon Q Developer or Cloud Code, Cloud Code can help you generate this code. And this could be the boilerplate code. It could be the scaffolding, where you can first get some ideas, and then you can start editing the code. And it's very important to talk about this from the angle that, hey, let's see the quality of this code. When you first take a look at the code generated by these tools, you might think, hey, this is a code that is probably written by a developer of 2 to 3 years of experience, right? Because when you see exception handling, it'll handle exception E, and then it'll say system out println if you're writing Java, right? It's not going to have very specific exception handling. It's not going to have the advanced set of code in the beginning. And I think it's by design, because they don't want the developer who is seeing all this code to get overwhelmed and say, forget about this. I'm going to probably write my own stuff anyways. But you can always interact with that code and modify it where it needs to be modified. If you have a logger, for example, that is asynchronous, that has to write into your own logs, you can just say, hey, talk to my library that does logging, and inject that instead of writing system output calls. Now let's talk about the Amazon Code Whisperer. It's a very interesting tool which has access to and context about the AWS services, the IAM roles, the Cognito roles, and all the other things that are needed to run something efficiently in AWS. And you can also edit this directly within the console of AWS. If you're writing a Lambda function that is exposed via the API gateway, AWS API gateway, or it is accessing some other step function, talking to other Lambda functions, you can actually get suggestions within the console of AWS itself without actually having to wait for Amazon Q Developer to be integrated with the IDE. So I thought it was pretty useful. And even if you don't use any AI tooling, you can still use the code gen from Swagger or OpenAPI itself that can spit out stubs or the client-side code and the server-side code for your API contexts. And this is based on the OpenAPI spec itself. Now, developer efficiency is what is exactly developer efficiency? We as developers want to save time. We want to get our work done in high quality, but we don't want to spend as much time, right? And we also don't want to definitely spend time on doing mundane things that don't really add to any skill set building, right? So that's where these tools come into picture. So VS Code that can integrate with Copilot or Amazon Q Developer or other, like Tab9, for example, can help you do a lot of that work. And it's not only about generating the code. So let's say, as an engineering manager, when I used to manage ICs, I would give the individual contributor a task to fix a bug, a pesky bug that other people will have to take some time, decent amount of time to learn and then fix. So a new developer comes in, a task is to identify where the bug is happening and then fix it. So the developer would go and put their own conditions, conditional if debug statements, as well as some instrumentation, and then identify the issue and then fix it. But what if they don't have to do that at all these days, right? You can just say, hey, explain to me where all this instance is being used, and when can this instance ever go out of memory, or when this instance can actually be null reference exception, can raise a null reference exception. How about this method that takes 13 arguments? Why does it take 13 arguments? Right? Now, the tooling can explain that to the developer, that where all the instance is being used, what is the reason for actually having all these arguments exposed. And it'll not only take a look at Control-Shift-F and look at all the places the instance is referred to. Rather, it'll actually try to explain the reason why the design is implemented in a certain way. And that's where the beauty of these tools is, where they allow you to understand the code. And once the developer understands the code, this junior developer we just hired, they can quickly go and try to fix the problem. And this is also a little bit philosophical in some people's minds, that, including mine sometimes, that does that make the developer more efficient only, or does it also make them smarter, right? Counter argument is that if I have to go through the pain of understanding the code by looking at all the places where it is used, then maybe I'll understand it in a much better way, and then I will get a better command over the code base in general. Cursor AI is a very fast-growing tool. Claude, Sonnet, and Cursor combination gives us a lot of good quality code generation, documentation generation, test generation, etc. Tab 9 is mentioned here because we look. Tab 9 says that, hey, look, we don't look at the quantity of the code we generate, but the quality of the things, because we are context aware, we understand it fully, and then only we suggest you something. And Claude Code is the one that I gave you an examples of, where it's a CLI tool. Yes, you can hack it around by integrating with the IDE, but the idea is to really explain the code and then understand the architecture and make it better. For testing, you can use some of these tools. I'll just focus on the PostBot and Postman AI, where it helps you generate the test cases and also understand the results, compare the results, and then you can save all of that mundane task time that otherwise developer would have taken. Ready API is another tool we use that at WEX. It's not very AI first mindset based tooling, at least based on the features that we've used, but it has an MCP that allows you to build a test harness. You can do end-to-end testing for your system using that. And for monitoring now, it's not about just injecting the monitoring code. You can do that. Obviously, you can say, hey, look, wherever all these methods, maybe aspect-oriented or other ways, you can inject your monitoring and alarming capabilities within the code. But once you have that already, then the watchdog can help you understand where some anomalies are and how you can actually address some of these issues in your code base. You can also go basic route, get all the logs that you have that are cleansed and human readable, and say, hey, ChatGPT, can you let me understand where all the calls are happening, and which calls are repetitive, and which calls I can actually do some caching for, which are almost always delivering the same results back to the customer. Sneak Code is another tool we use at WEX, helps you understand the vulnerabilities at the code review time itself, and can help you identify what the issues are and how you can address some of those issues. And StackHawk allows similar feature set, allows you to detect some of the injection vulnerabilities. For developer experience, it's super important to be able to deliver a good quality developer experience without having to spend a lot of time. There's not much glory in building a developer experience, but it is very important for the end users, right? So README Refactored, one of the tools we use at WEX, allows you to develop these documentations as you're coding, as you're spitting out your specs. And also, of course, Thineo is another tool we're experimenting with today that has a bidirectional sync between GitHub and your documentation portal. It also supports publishing documentation for gRPC services and not only for the RESTful services. Swim is another tool that you can consider that focuses on legacy code base. Mainframe-based documentation can be generated and maintained with the help of that tool. And also, you can embed ChatGPT or other chat tools within your developer portal, where developer can just ask for some question. Okay, help me understand how this API works. Help me understand how, or generate me a workflow where I can wire all these APIs together and get a scenario done, right? I don't think we have time for the demo, but I'll just explain one of the things I recently did. I have 1 minute left, yes? OK. So I work on the payment side, and all the card payments are processed using a message format called ISO 8583. It's a binary channel-based protocol, and it's a compressed protocol. I asked Claude I want to create an API project where I want to process payments, where I want to do authorizations, clearing, and reversal of the transaction. But I want to be able to bridge between ISO 8583 channel and the high-level channel using HTTP 1.1 based REST services. And then it spits out all the code base, contracts, the parser for ISO 8583. But then it tells me, OK, you have done all of this, but you also need to write some business logic. You also need to write some test cases. Which one would you like me to do next? Right? So you can actually interact with it and get a lot of the work done. But I don't want it to go into writing my business logic for me, because that's something that I think developers will have a better idea in writing. So that's what I was going to show you, how easy it is to generate and create some actual business purpose elements in your code base, and how you can interact with it to make it better. But anyways, in summary here, not optional, must use it today if you're not already, and also use it to grow the business, not only to just keep up and then get efficiencies in front of you. But that's all the main messages. Thank you for attending this talk.